A German shepherd mother dies, and what her puppies did next will make you cry. A young paramedic thought she was just saving a litter of orphaned pups, but the moment she took them home, her life was thrown into danger. These weren't ordinary puppies. They carried something their enemies didn't want anyone to find. When shadows closed in and the stakes turned deadly, the smallest pup revealed a hidden instinct that could change everything. But if the truth comes out, will it save lives or cost them all? And how far will the people in power go to silence what these puppies are about to expose? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The shrill ring of her emergency pager pierced the midnight silence, jolting Reese Calder from her light doze in the station's break room. Her hand fumbled for the device, eyes struggling to focus on the tiny screen. A single vehicle accident on Desert Pine Road, about 15 miles outside of Grantham. "Coming," she mumbled into her radio, already reaching for her boots. The cool New Mexico night air hit her face as she hurried to her ambulance, her mind shifting into the focused state she'd learned during her paramedic training. The red and white emergency vehicle roared to life, its lights cutting through the darkness as she pulled out onto the empty street. Desert Pine Road stretched before her like a black ribbon under the stars. Out here, the desert seemed endless, broken only by the occasional scrub brush and towering saguaro cactus. The coordinates led her deeper into the wilderness, where the asphalt gave way to packed dirt and gravel. Her headlights caught something metallic in the distance, the mangled remains of a pickup truck, its front end wrapped around a concrete culvert. The vehicle had skidded off the road, leaving long tracks in the loose soil. Reese's heart rate picked up as she brought the ambulance to a stop, grabbing her medical kit. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17 on scene," she reported, her boots crunching on gravel. "Single vehicle accident, one visible occupant." The driver was slumped over the steering wheel, but Reese could see the rise and fall of breathing. Male, middle-aged, with a nasty gash on his forehead, but no immediately life-threatening injuries. She worked quickly, checking vitals and applying a pressure bandage to stop the bleeding. A sound made her pause, a low whine coming from the direction of the culvert. Shining her flashlight toward the noise, Reese caught a glimpse of movement. There, in the concrete tunnel, a large German shepherd lay on her side, her body curved protectively around. Reese's breath caught. Puppies. 6 tiny bodies pressed against their mother's belly, squirming and whimpering. "Hey there, girl," Reese said softly, approaching slowly. The dog's eyes met hers, intelligent, pain-filled eyes that seemed to hold a desperate message. Blood matted the shepherd's thick fur, and her breathing was labored. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The dog, Reese could see a red bandana around her neck, made no aggressive move as she knelt beside her. Instead, she lifted her head slightly, nudging the closest puppy toward Reese with her nose. The gesture was unmistakable. "Save them." "Let me look at you first," Reese murmured, running gentle hands over the dog's body. Her heart sank as she felt the extensive internal injuries. The shepherd must have been thrown from the truck during the crash, but had somehow dragged herself to the culvert to protect her babies. The dog's eyes never left Reese's face as she continued her examination. There was an acceptance in that gaze, a knowing that her time was short. Again she nudged one of her puppies, this time the smallest of the litter, a sandy brown pup with a dark muzzle. "I understand," Reese whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "I'll take care of them. I promise." The mother dog seemed to relax at these words. Slowly, painfully, she began nudging each puppy, one by one, toward Reese. The paramedic gathered them carefully, creating a makeshift nest with her jacket in a protected spot near her ambulance. The runt, somehow Reese knew this one was special, trembled against her chest as she carried him. When she returned to the culvert, the shepherd's breathing had grown more labored. Reese sat beside her, gently lifting the dog's head into her lap. "You did so good," she murmured, stroking the graying fur around the dog's muzzle. "They're safe now. You can rest." The dog's tail thumped once against the ground, and she let out a soft sigh. Her eyes, still fixed on Reese's face, slowly dulled. One final breath escaped, and then she was gone. Reese allowed herself a moment of grief, her tears falling silently onto the red bandana. As she went to untie it, something caught her eye. A metal tag stamped with a number. The sequence seemed familiar, tugging at her memory. She'd seen similar numbers on county paperwork, specifically from Caro Security Canines, she whispered. The high-end training facility that supplied dogs to law enforcement and security firms across the state. She'd transported injured canine officers before, and their documentation always carried that distinctive numbering system. Standing up, Reese walked back to examine the crashed pickup more carefully. Now that backup had arrived to transport the driver, she could focus on the details that had been nagging at her subconscious. The scrape patterns on the bumper seemed odd for a simple run-off-the-road accident. And there, caught in the twisted metal, flecks of blue paint that didn't match the truck's dark green finish. The implications made her stomach churn. This might not have been an accident at all. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn painting the eastern horizon in pale gold and pink. Reese stood by her ambulance, looking down at the 6 puppies now sleeping in a makeshift bed of blankets. Protocol dictated that she should contact animal control, surrender the litter to the proper authorities. The logical part of her brain knew this was the right course of action. But something felt wrong about this whole situation. The crash site, the blue paint, the numbered tag that linked back to Caro. It all added up to something that made her instincts scream in warning. The runt of the litter, Lumen. She'd already named him in her head. Pressed against her leg, looking up at her with eyes that seemed to hold the same trust his mother had shown. "What do you think, little one?" she asked softly, kneeling down to scratch behind his ears. "Should we follow the rules or follow our gut?" Lumen's tiny tail wagged, and he licked her hand. The weight of the decision settled over her like a heavy blanket as she watched the sun creep higher over the desert. Something was very wrong here, and surrendering these puppies might be condemning them to whatever fate their mother had been trying to save them from. Her radio crackled with an incoming call from dispatch, making her jump. Time was running out. She had to decide, now. Follow protocol and hand over the pups, or trust her instincts and dig deeper into what really happened on this lonely desert road. Lumen pressed closer to her leg, his tiny body still trembling slightly. She thought of his mother's final moments, the trust in those eyes as she entrusted her babies to Reese's care. The decision crystallized in her heart, clear and certain. "Okay, kids," she said softly to the litter. "Let's figure out what's really going on here. I promised your mama I'd keep you safe, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." She gathered the puppies carefully, making sure they were secure in their makeshift bed in the ambulance. Lumen, the last to be picked up, snuggled into her arms with complete trust. "I've got you," she whispered. "All of you. And we're going to get to the bottom of this, whatever it takes." The rising sun cast long shadows across the desert as Reese closed the ambulance doors, sealing her choice. She didn't know exactly what she was getting into, but she knew one thing for certain. She would honor the trust that dying mother dog had placed in her, no matter what it took. The road ahead stretched out before her, empty and full of questions. But with 6 tiny lives depending on her, and the memory of their mother's sacrifice burning in her heart, Reese knew she couldn't walk away. Something was wrong at Caro Security Canines, and she was going to find out what it was. She climbed into the driver's seat, checking one more time on her precious cargo. 6 pairs of eyes looked back at her, scared, trusting, alive. Whatever came next, she would protect them. She owed their mother that much. "Dispatch," she said into her radio. "Unit 17 returning to station." She didn't mention her additional passengers. That would be a problem for later. Right now, she had puppies to care for and a mystery to unravel. The ambulance pulled away from the crash site, leaving behind the empty culvert where a mother's sacrifice had set in motion events that would change everything. In the back, Lumen's tiny whimper seemed to echo his mother's final trust. A torch passed from one loyal heart to another in the darkness of a desert night. The fading twilight cast long shadows across Reese's small trailer as she juggled an armful of squirming puppies and fumbled with her keys. The metal door creaked open, revealing her modest but tidy living space, a compact kitchen, a worn couch, and a small dining nook where medical textbooks were stacked beside half-finished study notes. "Okay, little ones," she murmured, setting the cardboard box down carefully. "Let's get you settled." The 6 puppies whimpered and wobbled, their tiny paws scrabbling against the sides of the box. The smallest one, Lumen, as she'd started calling the runt, pressed against her siblings, shivering despite the warm evening air. Reese's hands shook slightly as she prepared formula in the kitchen, her mind replaying the accident scene over and over. The mangled pickup truck, Kiva's final moments, those suspicious blue paint marks, none of it added up to a simple accident. She filled 6 small bottles with warm formula, testing each one against her wrist like she'd learned in her emergency animal care training. Picking up her phone, she dialed a familiar number. After 3 rings, a gruff but friendly voice answered. "Dwight Haller speaking." "Dwight, it's Reese. I need your advice on something complicated." The veteran EMT's voice softened. "What's got you worried, kid?" As Reese explained the situation, she could hear Dwight's breathing change, the slight intake of breath when she mentioned Caro security canines, the thoughtful pause when she described the paint transfer on the crashed truck. "Those marking numbers on Kiva's bandana," Dwight said slowly. "You're sure they matched Caro's system?" "Positive. I've seen enough of their paperwork during transport calls. And Dwight—" Reese lowered her voice, though she was alone in her trailer. "Something feels wrong about this whole thing." "Trust your instincts," Dwight replied. "They've served you well so far. What's your next move?" Before Reese could answer, her phone beeped with an incoming call from the sheriff's office. "Hold on, Dwight. I need to take this. Can you stand by?" "I'll be here." Switching lines, Reese's heart sank as Deputy Martinez's clipped tones informed her that under county contract, all strays and rescue animals had to be surrendered to Caro security canines by morning. No exceptions. "But these puppies just lost their mother," Reese protested. "They need specialized care. Mr. Caro's facility is fully equipped for neonatal care." Martinez cut in. "He's already been notified and is en route to collect them." Reese's stomach churned. "En route?" "Now. Standard procedure, Miss Calder. Please cooperate fully." The line went dead. Reese quickly switched back to Dwight. "They're sending Caro here now." "Tonight." "I'm on my way," Dwight said without hesitation. "Stall them however you can. I'll be there in 15 minutes. True to the deputy's word, headlights swept across Reese's trailer windows barely 10 minutes later. A gleaming blue service truck pulled up, its pristine paint job catching the security lights. Eldon Caro stepped out, cutting an impressive figure in his crisp button-down shirt and pressed slacks despite the late hour. 2 burly men in Caro security uniforms flanked him as he approached Reese's door. Reese took a deep breath and opened it before he could knock. "Mr. Caro, this is unexpected. Miss Calder." His smile was perfect, practiced, professional, and completely failed to warm his calculating eyes. "I understand you've recovered some of our property from tonight's unfortunate incident." He held out a leather portfolio containing several official-looking documents. "I have all the necessary paperwork here to take custody of the animals." Reese accepted the portfolio but didn't open it immediately. "Of course. I'll need to document everything properly for the incident report. Would you mind walking me through the chain of custody procedures?" Something flickered in Caro's expression, annoyance, quickly masked. "Surely that's not necessary at this hour." A simple transfer receipt would suffice. "I'm still in training," Reese said apologetically, flipping slowly through the papers. "We're required to follow all protocols exactly. Actually, I have some questions about these forms." She proceeded to ask detailed questions about each document, noting how Caro's polite facade began to crack slightly around the edges. His men shifted restlessly by their truck, which Reese studied with careful casualness. The blue paint was an exact match to the transfers she'd observed at the crash site. The sound of another vehicle approaching made everyone turn. Dwight's familiar pickup rolled to a stop, and the veteran EMT emerged, nodding casually to the group. "Evening, folks. Hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Mr. Haller," Caro acknowledged stiffly. "This is a simple property recovery. Your presence isn't required." "Just checking in on my trainee," Dwight said easily, coming to stand beside Reese, making sure all the proper procedures are followed. The tension in the air thickened. Reese continued her methodical review of the paperwork, noting discrepancies in dates and registration numbers. "Mr. Caro, I'm seeing some inconsistencies here that we'll need to verify before proceeding. Would you mind if I had our department review these tomorrow?" Caro's smile had completely vanished now. "The county contract is quite clear, Miss Calder. Those animals are to be surrendered immediately. And they will be, once we've confirmed all the documentation is in order," Reese replied firmly. "I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining proper records." The standoff lasted several long moments before Caro inclined his head slightly. "Very well. You have until noon tomorrow. I trust you understand the consequences of interfering with contracted services." The threat was subtle but clear. Reese met his gaze steadily. "I'm just following procedures, Mr. Caro. I'm sure you'd do the same." After they drove away, Reese and Dwight exchanged knowing looks. Without a word, they both moved to examine the distinctive blue paint on Caro's truck under the security light. "Well," Dwight said quietly, "I'd say that matches what you saw at the crash site." "Exactly what I was thinking." Reese hugged herself, suddenly cold despite the warm night. "What have I just stepped into, Dwight?" The older EMT squeezed her shoulder. "Something bad, but you're doing the right thing." He glanced at the trailer where the puppies could be heard whimpering. "Those little ones need protection, and clearly their mama knew that too." "Question is, what was Caro trying to cover up?" "I don't know," Reese said, "but I'm not handing these pups over until we figure it out." She straightened her shoulders, determination replacing her fear. "Will you help me?" "Already am, kid." Dwight headed for his truck. "I'll make some calls, see what I can dig up about Caro's operation. You focus on keeping those pups alive and healthy. They're our only evidence right now." After Dwight left, Reese returned to the puppies, who were crying for their next feeding. As she settled on the floor with the box beside her, Lumen crawled into her lap, seeking warmth and comfort. "Don't worry, little ones," she whispered, knowing she was making a potentially dangerous choice, but unable to ignore her instincts. "We're going to figure this out. I promised your mama I'd keep you safe, and I will." She worked late into the night, documenting everything she could remember about the accident scene, taking photos of the paperwork Caro had provided, and making detailed notes about his visit. The puppies finally settled into sleep, but Reese remained alert, aware that she had just positioned herself between a powerful man and something he desperately wanted to keep hidden. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the creosote bushes, carrying secrets of its own. But for now, in this small trailer on the outskirts of town, 6 tiny lives slept peacefully, unaware of the brewing storm around them. Their protector sat guard, knowing that with each passing hour she was moving further from the safe path of compliance and deeper into dangerous territory. But as she watched the puppies sleep, Reese knew she couldn't have chosen differently. Something about this situation was very wrong, and if no one else was willing to question it, then she would. She just hoped she had the strength and support to see it through. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Reese's truck bounced along the desert road, Dwight riding shotgun. They had waited until their shift change to return to the crash site, knowing they needed daylight and privacy to properly examine the scene. The desert stretched endlessly around them, dotted with scrubby bushes and the occasional twisted juniper. "Pull over here," Dwight instructed, pointing to a spot about 50 yards before the actual crash site. We don't want to disturb any evidence that might be left. Reese nodded, guiding her truck onto the shoulder. She grabbed her camera and a few evidence bags from the back seat. The weight of what they were doing, investigating off the books, made her movements deliberate and careful. "You sure about this?" she asked Dwight as they walked toward the scene. "Someone has to look closer," he replied, his weathered face serious. "And since the sheriff's office seems content with writing this off as an accident..." They reached the spot where the pickup had gone off the road. In the harsh morning light, the scrape marks on the asphalt stood out clearly, long, deliberate-looking streaks that told a different story than a simple loss of control. "These don't look random," Reese said, crouching down to photograph the marks. "See how they angle? It's like something pushed the truck from behind." Dwight nodded, walking the pattern. "Consistent with a larger vehicle making contact?" "About the height of a truck bumper, I'd say." He didn't need to mention whose trucks they were thinking of. They worked methodically, documenting everything. Reese found more blue paint flecks caught in the rough surface of the road and carefully collected them in an evidence bag. The morning grew hotter as they pieced together what might have happened that night. "Dwight!" Reese called suddenly, standing at the edge of the culvert where she'd found Kiva. "Look at this." She pointed to distinct tire tracks in the hard-packed earth. "These aren't from emergency vehicles. They're older." Someone was watching this stretch of road. The implications made her skin crawl. Had someone been waiting for Kiva and her pups to pass by? The thought brought bile to her throat. Back at the station later that morning, Reese couldn't shake the feeling that they were uncovering something bigger than a simple contract dispute. She was checking supply inventory when she overheard two senior EMTs talking in the break room. "Waste of a good working dog," one was saying. "Kiva was one of the best FEMA dogs they had back in the day. Search and rescue, cadaver work, she could do it all." Reese's hand stilled on the supplies she was counting. She edged closer to the door, straining to hear more. "Caro only got her for breeding after she retired," the other replied. "But I heard his whole operation is getting long in the tooth. Most of his dogs are past their prime now. Convenient timing for an accident, isn't it? Insurance would cover new stock." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Reese had heard enough. She found Dwight in the garage, checking equipment. "Did you know about Kiva?" she asked without preamble. "That she was a FEMA dog?" Dwight's expression grew grim. "I'd heard rumors, and other things too, about Caro's breeding program struggling. Word is he's due for what some call an insurance reset." He lowered his voice. "Wouldn't be the first time a kennel owner arranged a convenient tragedy to refresh their stock." Reese's hand went to her pocket, where she kept Kiva's bandana with its stamped number. She'd been studying county regulations all morning, and now the pieces were starting to fit together in a horrifying pattern. "If this was deliberate," she said slowly, "then Kiva didn't die because of a broken contract. She died because she was evidence, aging evidence that Caro needed to eliminate. Along with her pups," Dwight added quietly. "Clean slate for a fresh start with the insurance money." The reality of what they were suggesting settled heavily between them. Reese thought of the 6 puppies currently safe at her place, protected by a rotation of friends she trusted to watch them while she worked. She'd need to be even more careful now. "I've been reading the county regulations," she told Dwight. "There are ways to challenge Caro's claim on the pups, especially if we can prove misconduct. And if the sheriff won't help..." "We go over his head," Dwight finished. "State investigators take insurance fraud pretty seriously." They spent that evening at Reese's trailer, spreading papers across her small kitchen table while the puppies played in their pen nearby. Dwight had brought takeout, but neither of them had much appetite as they mapped out what they knew. "Okay, let's lay it out," Dwight said, uncapping a marker. On a large piece of paper, he began writing. "Motive: Caro's breeding stock is aging out. Insurance would pay for new dogs if something unfortunate happened to the old ones. Proximity, Reese added. The crash site is only 10 miles from Caro's facility, on a road his trucks regularly travel. Those tire tracks show someone was watching that stretch. And here's the kicker. County protection. Dwight tapped the marker on the table. Caro's contracts make him practically untouchable locally. The sheriff's office didn't even question the accident story. Reese picked up Kiva's bandana, running her thumb over the stamped number. We need more proof. Something concrete that shows this wasn't random. We'll get it, Dwight assured her, but we need to be careful. Caro's got friends in high places, and he's not going to like anyone digging into this. Looking at their notes spread across the table, Reese felt the weight of what they were undertaking. The accident scene had revealed its secrets in the daylight. The deliberate marks, the waiting tire tracks, the scattered evidence of a crime disguised as misfortune. And now, with what they knew about Kiva's background and Caro's likely motives, the random tragedy had transformed into something far more sinister. Lumen, the runt of the litter, wobbled over to where Reese sat and pawed at her leg. She picked up the tiny pup, cradling him close. His siblings romped nearby, unaware of the danger they'd narrowly escaped or the battle brewing over their future. We'll need documentation of everything, she said, scratching behind Lumen's ears. Photos, statements, copies of regulations and contracts. If we're going to challenge Caro, we can't leave any loose ends. And we'll need to move carefully, Dwight cautioned. One wrong step, and Caro could make those pups disappear before any investigation gets started. Reese nodded, her resolve strengthening. The pieces were falling into place. The aging breeding stock, the insurance opportunity, the county contracts that kept questions at bay. Kiva's death had been planned, calculated, meant to look like a tragic accident while solving Caro's business problems in one cruel stroke. But Kiva had survived long enough to save her pups, long enough to place them in the care of someone who would question the convenient story, long enough to ensure that her death wouldn't go unexamined. We'll start gathering everything tomorrow, Reese decided. And I want to talk to some of the other EMTs who knew about Kiva's FEMA work. The more we can verify about her background, the stronger our case will be. Dwight began gathering their notes, carefully organizing them into a folder. I'll reach out to some contacts at the state level, feel out who might be willing to look into this. But until we have solid proof, we keep this between us. The night settled around the trailer, the desert wind whistling through the creosote bushes outside. In their pen, the puppies were settling down for sleep, a pile of fuzzy bodies and gentle snores. Reese watched them, thinking of their mother's sacrifice and the twisted scheme that had orchestrated it. The accident wasn't random. The truth of that sat cold and hard in her stomach now. Kiva had died because she was inconvenient to a man's profits, and her pups had been meant to die with her. But they hadn't, and now they were evidence of something larger, a pattern of exploitation and casual cruelty hidden behind official paperwork and friendly smiles. The desert night wrapped around Reese's trailer like a thick blanket, the silence broken only by the gentle whir of her small space heater and the occasional rustling of puppies in their carrier. She'd spent hours organizing evidence with Dwight, and exhaustion tugged at her edges. But something kept her from fully relaxing, an instinct honed by years of emergency response work that whispered, "Stay alert." Dwight had dozed off in her worn armchair, his notebook still open on his lap. The digital clock on her microwave blinked close to midnight. Reese moved quietly through her small living space, checking on the sleeping puppies. Lumen, ever vigilant, lifted his head to watch her pass. The first warning came as a whisper of movement outside, too deliberate to be the wind, too careful to be innocent. Reese's hand had just reached for her phone when the glass shattered. The window exploded inward in a spray of glittering shards. Two men, their faces obscured by dark clothing, forced their way through her door before she could react. Their boots crunched on broken glass as they lunged straight for the carrier holding the puppies. "No!" Reese shouted, throwing herself between them and the pups. Dwight jerked awake, immediately moving to help. The struggle was brutal and desperate. Bodies collided in the confined space of her trailer. One of the intruders shoved hard, sending Reese stumbling. A shoulder, she couldn't tell whose, slammed into her propane heater. The impact was followed by an ominous crack, and then a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinct hiss of escaping gas. In that moment of chaos, something remarkable happened. Lumen, the smallest of Kiva's pups, began scratching at the carrier door. 3 distinct scrapes, followed by a whine, then more scratches. The pattern hit Reese like a bolt of lightning. It was identical to the alert sequence Kiva had used in her search and rescue work. Time seemed to crystallize. The hissing gas, the confined space. The potential for disaster struck her with paramedics' clarity. "Gas line!" she shouted to Dwight. Moving on pure instinct, she lunged for the main valve, twisting it shut while Dwight grabbed the carrier. "Get them out!" she commanded, already moving to shove the remaining loose puppies toward the door. The intruders, realizing their plan was unraveling, began to retreat. They stumbled into the yard, the cool night air a shock after the closeness of the trailer. Behind them, a loose electrical wire sparked once, bright in the darkness, but found nothing to ignite. The sound of running footsteps and a vehicle starting up marked the intruders' retreat into the night. Reese stood in her small yard, her whole body trembling. Lumen pressed against her chest, his small form shaking as violently as her own. She clutched him closer, feeling his rapid heartbeat against her palm. "Jesus." Dwight exhaled the word like a curse, setting down the carrier and running a hand through his grey hair. That wasn't just a grab and run. They were going to... He couldn't finish the sentence. "A snatch and burn," Reese completed grimly. They were going to take the pups and let the gas. She hugged Lumen tighter, unable to voice the rest. The night air carried the scent of creosote and dirt, grounding her in the present moment. The puppies, now fully awake, whimpered in their carrier. Dwight checked each one carefully, his hands gentle despite their slight tremor. Lumen knew. Reese said softly, looking down at the small dog in her arms, just like his mother would have. That alert, it was exactly Kiva's pattern. Dwight nodded, his face grim in the dim light. Saved all our lives, that little one did. Those instincts, they run deep. They stood in silence for a moment, the reality of what had almost happened settling over them like a heavy shroud. Then Reese straightened her shoulders, determination replacing fear. "We're done reacting," she declared, her voice steady despite the lingering tremors in her hands. "No more waiting to see what Caro tries next. From now on, we prove everything." "Agreed," Dwight said firmly. "First thing tomorrow, we document all of this. The broken window, the gas line, everything. We get photos, file reports, create a paper trail they can't ignore or bury." Reese looked down at Lumen, who had finally stopped shaking and was watching her with his mother's steady gaze. "We're going to need somewhere safer to stay," she said. "Somewhere they won't expect." "I've got a place," Dwight offered. "My sister's old cabin up in the hills. It's basic, but it's secure and off the main roads. We can move everything there tonight." Reese nodded, already mentally cataloging what they would need. Evidence? Supplies? The puppies' food and bedding? Everything that could help them build their case against Caro. As they began gathering their essentials, Reese couldn't help but marvel at how Kiva's legacy lived on in her smallest pup. Lumen's alert, that precise, practiced sequence, had saved them all from what could have been a devastating explosion. It was as if Kiva herself had reached across the divide between life and death to protect them through her offspring. The night's events had transformed their cautious investigation into something more urgent. Caro had shown his hand, shown how far he was willing to go to protect his secrets and eliminate any threats to his operation. But in doing so, he'd given them something valuable, proof of his desperation and the lengths he would go to conceal the truth. They worked quickly and quietly, loading the essentials into Dwight's truck. The puppies settled into their carrier, huddling together for comfort, while Lumen remained in Reese's arms, his presence a reminder of both what they'd nearly lost and what they were fighting to protect. As they drove away from her trailer, Reese watched her home disappear into the darkness. The night's attack had changed everything. They were no longer just gathering evidence of past crimes, they were preventing future ones. And somewhere in the mix of fear, determination, and purpose, Reese felt a fierce pride in Lumen's actions. Like his mother before him, he had risen to the moment when lives depended on it. The first rays of sunlight crept over the desert horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Reese sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold beside her as she stared at the stamped number from Kiva's bandana for what felt like the 100th time. Something about it had been nagging at her consciousness since she first saw it. The pups were sleeping peacefully in their makeshift pen nearby, their little bodies curled together for warmth. Lumen twitched in his sleep, his paw occasionally moving as if he were running in a dream. The sight of them made her heart ache with renewed determination to uncover the truth about what had happened to their mother. She pulled out her old FEMA training manual, flipping through the pages until she found the section on coordinate systems. Her eyes widened as the realization hit her. The format wasn't a county contract number at all. It matched the precise structure of GPS coordinates she'd learned during her emergency response training. Her hands shaking slightly with excitement, she grabbed her phone and punched in the numbers. The location pinpointed a remote arroyo about 20 miles outside of town. She remembered Dwight mentioning that area was once used for training search and rescue dogs. "Dwight," she said into her phone moments later, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need you to come over. I think I found something." Within 30 minutes, Dwight's weathered pickup truck pulled up outside. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair as he climbed out, thermos in hand. His eyes were alert despite the early hour, reading the urgency in her expression. "What have you got?" he asked, following her inside. Reese spread out her materials on the table. "Look at this number again," she said, pointing to the bandana. "We've been thinking about it wrong. It's not a contract number, it's coordinates, GPS coordinates." Dwight leaned in, his expression thoughtful as she explained her discovery. "Makes sense," he said finally. "That area was used for FEMA training exercises years ago. Kiva would have worked there." "We need to check it out," Reese said, already gathering supplies. "Whatever's there might help us understand what really happened." They loaded the pups into Dwight's truck, making sure they had water and shade for the journey. The morning was still cool, but the desert heat would build quickly. Lumen insisted on riding in the cab with them, his small form pressed against Reese's leg as they drove. The truck bounced along dirt roads, kicking up clouds of dust behind them. The landscape grew increasingly rugged, dotted with scraggly mesquite and ocotillo. After about 40 minutes, they reached the coordinates, parking at the edge of a deep arroyo cut into the earth by centuries of flash floods. "This is it," Reese said, checking her phone's GPS one last time. They let the pups out of their carriers, keeping them close as they began to explore the area. Almost immediately, something strange happened. The puppies, usually playful and scattered, began to move with unusual focus, their noses lifted to the wind, testing the air as if picking up some ancient scent. "Look at them," Dwight murmured. "It's like they know this place." The pups moved in perfect synchronization, as if following an invisible trail. Even shy little Lumen seemed transformed, his movements confident and purposeful. They approached a specific spot near the arroyo wall and began pawing at the sand in unison. Reese and Dwight exchanged glances before dropping to their knees beside the pups. They began to dig where the puppies indicated, their hands scooping away layers of sand. The morning sun beat down on their backs as they worked, the only sounds their breathing and the soft whine of the pups. After about 10 minutes, Dwight's hand struck something solid. A hollow metallic thunk echoed up from beneath the sand. They cleared away more dirt, revealing the rusted outline of an old ammunition can, the kind often used by military personnel to store supplies. With trembling fingers, Reese brushed away the last of the sand and lifted the can. It was surprisingly heavy. The lid was stuck from years of exposure, but Dwight managed to work it loose with his pocket knife. Inside, protected from the elements, they found 2 items, a crumpled folder that appeared to be from Kiva's handler and a small micro-recorder. Reese's breath caught in her throat as she lifted out the recorder, turning it over in her hands. This was from inside Caro's warehouse, she said softly, recognizing the make and model as one commonly used for official evaluations. Whatever's on here. The air around them seemed to grow thin, the magnitude of their discovery settling over them like a physical weight. This wasn't just circumstantial evidence anymore. This was potentially real proof of whatever Caro had been trying to hide. Reese carefully tucked the recorder into her pocket, not wanting to risk playing it here in the open. They quickly packed up the pups, who seemed satisfied now that their mission was accomplished. As they made their way back to the truck, Reese couldn't help but marvel at how Kiva's influence lived on through her puppies, leading them straight to this crucial evidence. "Good job, little ones," she whispered to the pups as she secured them in their carriers. "Your mama helped us one more time." They drove back toward town in tense silence, both aware of the significance of what they'd found. The micro-recorder felt like it was burning a hole in Reese's pocket. Whatever was recorded on it might finally give voice to the proof they so desperately needed. Proof that could explain why Kiva had to die, and why Caro was so desperate to get his hands on her puppies. The desert stretched out around them, vast and unchanging, but Reese knew that everything had shifted. They weren't just protecting orphaned puppies anymore. They were uncovering a truth that someone had tried very hard to bury in the sand. The cool dimness of Dwight's garage wrapped around Reese like a protective blanket as she sat on an old metal stool, watching him tinker with the micro-recorder they'd found. The familiar scents of motor oil and sawdust helped steady her nerves, while 6 drowsy puppies dozed in their carrier nearby. Lumen, the smallest of the litter, kept one eye trained on her, as if sensing her anxiety. "Battery's pretty much dead," Dwight muttered, his weathered hands carefully working with the device. "But I've got an adapter that should do the trick." He rummaged through a drawer filled with various cords and connectors, the metal contents clinking together. Reese hugged herself against the morning chill, her uniform jacket doing little to ward off the goosebumps rising on her arms. "How long do you think it'll take?" "Got it." Dwight held up a thin black cord triumphantly. "This should work." He connected the recorder to a small power bank, and a tiny red light flickered to life. "Now we wait a few minutes while it charges." The silence felt heavy as they watched the light pulse steadily. Reese's mind wandered back to Kiva's final moments, the way the mother dog had protected her pups until her last breath. Now, sitting in Dwight's garage with evidence that might explain her death, Reese felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, Dwight disconnected the power bank. "Should have enough juice now." He pressed the play button, and a crackle of static filled the garage. At first, there were just muffled sounds, footsteps, distant voices, the metallic clang of warehouse equipment. Then Caro's voice emerged, clear and cold. "The insurance adjuster's coming next week. Everything needs to be ready." Another voice, one Reese didn't recognize, responded, "What about the older stock?" "That's what the fire's for." Caro's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing nothing more important than the weather. "A strategic inventory cleanse. The paperwork's already prepared." Reese's hands clenched into fists. Dwight's face hardened as they continued listening. "And the breeding bitch?" the unknown voice asked. Caro's laugh sent chills down Reese's spine. "Well, the breeding bitch can't bark what she can't breathe if something goes wrong. Now can she?" The recorder captured more. Details about propane placement, timing, which documents needed adjusting. Each word painted a clearer picture of premeditated destruction. When the recording finally clicked to a stop, Reese felt sick to her stomach. "Son of a gun," Dwight whispered, running a hand through his graying hair. "He planned it all." The crash. Kiva. His voice trailed off as he looked at the sleeping puppies. Reese stood up, pacing the length of the garage. "We need to take this to someone. Someone with authority who'll actually do something about it." "That's a short list around here," Dwight said grimly. "Most of the brass is deep in Caro's pocket." Reese stopped pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. "What about Deputy Marla Beach?" Dwight snorted. "Beach? She's practically Caro's personal security detail. Everyone knows she's been looking the other way on his dealings for years." "Maybe," Reese acknowledged, "but her niece Sarah babysits for me sometimes. She's a good kid, talks about her aunt all the time. Says Marla got into law enforcement because she wanted to help people." "People change," Dwight warned, "especially when they owe favors. But what if that's exactly why she might help us?" Reese leaned against Dwight's workbench. "Think about it. The break-in at my place, the propane leak. That wasn't just about getting the puppies back. They were willing to kill me, kill all of us, to cover their tracks." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I'm making a timeline. Everything that's happened, everything we've found, the crash details, the blue paint flecks that match Caro's trucks, the break-in, the GPS coordinates that led us to the recorder." Dwight watched her work, his expression thoughtful. "You think laying it all out like that will convince her?" "I think if we show her the whole picture, especially the part where Caro's men were ready to blow up a residential area, she'll have to act. Whatever she owes Caro, it can't be worth that kind of collateral damage." Her fingers flew over the phone's screen, organizing the events chronologically. When she finished, she looked up at Dwight. "I'm going to call her. Ask her to meet somewhere neutral." "Not alone," Dwight said firmly. "No," Reese agreed. "Not alone." She glanced at the puppies, then back at the recorder. "We'll bring everything. The timeline, the evidence, the recording. Make copies first, though." Dwight nodded and began connecting the recorder to his computer. While he worked on creating backup files, Reese pulled up Deputy Beach's contact information. Her thumb hovered over the number for a moment as doubt crept in. What if they were wrong about Beach? What if this made everything worse? Lumen chose that moment to wake up, stretching and letting out a tiny yawn before fixing Reese with those intelligent eyes so much like Kiva's. The sight steadied her resolve. She pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before a clipped voice answered. "Deputy Beach." "Deputy, this is Reese Calder. I need to meet with you. It's about Eldon Caro and what really happened to one of his dogs." She kept her voice steady, professional. "I have evidence you need to see." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, Beach spoke again, her tone careful. "Evidence of what, exactly?" "Insurance fraud, attempted murder, and the deliberate killing of a former FEMA search and rescue dog." Reese took a deep breath. "I think you'll want to hear this yourself, Deputy. In person." Another pause, shorter this time. "The coffee shop on Main." 1 hour. The line went dead before Reese could respond. She looked at Dwight, who had finished making the copies. Well, he said, gathering their evidence into a folder. "I guess we're about to find out if Deputy Beach remembers why she pinned on that badge in the first place." Reese nodded, then began carefully loading the puppies into their carrier. Each one would be a reminder of what was at stake. 6 living pieces of evidence that their mother had died, protecting them from a man who saw them as nothing more than disposable inventory. As they prepared to leave, Reese double-checked everything. The timeline on her phone, the folder with their evidence, the backup copies safely stored in multiple locations. They couldn't afford to leave anything to chance, not now, when they finally had proof of what Caro was capable of. The morning sun had burned away the garage's chill by the time they finished, but Reese still felt cold inside. She knew that whatever happened next would change everything. For her, for the puppies, and hopefully for every animal in Caro's care. All they needed was one person willing to stand up and do the right thing. Looking at the recorder one last time before slipping it into her pocket, Reese thought about Kiva's final moments. The mother dog had trusted her with something precious. Now it was time to make sure that trust hadn't been misplaced. "Ready?" Dwight asked, keys in hand. Reese picked up the carrier, feeling Lumen's reassuring warmth against her leg. "Ready." Together they stepped out of the garage and into the bright morning light, carrying with them the truth about a midnight crash and a mother's sacrifice, and hoping it would be enough to finally bring justice for Kiva. The garage door creaked open, and Deputy Marla Beach stepped inside, her uniform crisp and her posture rigid. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she surveyed the scene. Reese, Dwight, and a carrier full of sleeping puppies. The morning light streaming through the dusty windows caught the sharp angles of her face, highlighting the wariness in her expression. "Make this quick," Beach said, her voice clipped. "I've got patrol in 30 minutes. Reese exchanged a glance with Dwight, who gave her an encouraging nod. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the recorder, but her voice remained steady. "You need to hear this first." The scratchy audio filled the garage. Caro's voice emerged, discussing inventory and staged fires with chilling casualness. When he mentioned the breeding bitch, Reese watched Beach's face carefully. The deputy's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tightened on her sleeves. "That's not all," Reese continued, describing the night raid in detail. The breaking glass, the men forcing their way in, the damaged propane heater. If Lumen hadn't alerted us to the gas leak... She let the implications hang in the air. "Lumen?" Beach's eyebrow lifted. "The runt." Reese gestured to the smallest pup, who lifted his head at the sound of his name. He gave the same alert sequence his mother Kiva used. 3 scratches, a whine, 3 more scratches. That's what saved us. Something flickered in Beach's expression. Sarah was supposed to be there that night, wasn't she? Babysitting? Yes. Reese met her eyes. Your niece called in sick at the last minute. The color drained from Beach's face. Her arms uncrossed, hands dropping to her sides as the full weight of what could have happened settled over her. She would have been... She couldn't finish the sentence. Here. Dwight stepped forward, spreading out several photographs on his workbench. These are from the crash site where Kiva died. Blue paint flecks that match Caro's service vehicles, scrape patterns consistent with a deliberate collision. He laid out more photos showing the timeline of evidence. Beach leaned in, her professional mask cracking as she studied each image. The garage fell silent except for the soft whimpers of dreaming puppies. Finally, she straightened, squaring her shoulders. "I'll help," she said, her voice harder now, determined. "But we do this my way." One shot, controlled conditions. She began pacing, thinking out loud. "We need him to admit to the timing of the fire. The recording is damning, but it's not dated. If we can get him to connect it to recent events." "What are you suggesting?" Reese asked. "A sting. You'll wear a wire." Beach stopped pacing and faced them. "These pups are his leverage point. He wants them gone. They're evidence he can't control. We use that." Dwight nodded slowly. "Bait him with what he wants most." "Exactly." Beach pulled out her notebook. "We'll create simple transfer documents, nothing fancy. Just enough to make it look like we're erasing the chain of custody. His arrogance will do the rest." They spent the next hour crafting the paperwork, making it just official-looking enough to be believable. Beach explained how she would coordinate with trusted officers to establish a quiet perimeter, keeping Caro's usual supporters away from the scene. "The key," Beach emphasized, tapping the documents, "is to keep him talking about the clean burn. Get him to elaborate on how the timing had to be perfect. The more he gloats, the better our case." Reese glanced at the sleeping puppies, then back to Beach. "What changed your mind?" "About helping us." The deputy was quiet for a moment, watching Lumen stretch in his sleep. "I've looked the other way before. Told myself it was just business, just the way things work in small towns." She shook her head. "But this? Trying to burn someone alive? That's not business. And it could have been Sarah in that trailer." "We'll need to move fast." Dwight pointed out, before he tries something else. Beach nodded, already pulling out her phone. I'll make the calls, set up the perimeter team. Give me 2 hours. She paused at the garage door, looking back at Reese. You sure you're up for wearing a wire? This isn't a game. Reese stood, lifting Lumen gently from the carrier. The tiny pup nuzzled into her arms, trusting and warm. Kiva died protecting these pups. She trusted me to keep them safe. I won't let her down. Okay then. Beach's expression softened slightly. 2 hours. We'll make it count. She slipped out of the garage, leaving Reese and Dwight to prepare for what was coming. Dwight began gathering the surveillance equipment they'd need, his movements precise and focused. You know, he said quietly, sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to the wrong people, even when it's scary as hell. Reese stroked Lumen's soft fur, drawing strength from his steady heartbeat against her palm. In her mind, she could still see Kiva's final moments, the trust in her eyes as she entrusted her babies to a stranger. That trust hadn't been misplaced. Now they had a chance to make sure her death wasn't in vain. They spent the next hour going over the plan repeatedly, refining each detail. Beach returned with the surveillance equipment and helped Reese get fitted with the wire, showing her how to adjust it for optimal sound pickup without being visible. Remember, Beach instructed, let him do most of the talking. Ask open-ended questions about the timing, about why it had to be that night. The more he explains, the more he incriminates himself. What if he suspects something? Reese asked, adjusting the wire under her shirt. That's why we'll have the perimeter in place. My people, not his. Beach's voice was firm. You'll never be without backup. The second anything feels wrong, we move in. They reviewed the transfer documents one last time, simple forms that would appear to release the puppies back to Caro's custody with no questions asked. The perfect bait for a man who thought he was above the law. 2 things work in our favor, Dwight added, checking the recording equipment one final time. His arrogance and his need to control the situation. He'll want to explain, to make sure you understand just how clever he was with the timing. Reese nodded, her determination growing stronger. She looked at the sleeping puppies, at Lumen's tiny form curled protectively around his siblings. Everything had led to this moment, Kiva's death, the break-in, the hidden recorder, and now Beach's crucial change of heart. The deputy stood by the garage door, her posture no longer defensive but alert and focused. She'd transformed from a reluctant obstacle into their strongest ally, driven by the realization of how close her own family had come to being caught in Caro's schemes. I'll get my team in position, Beach said, checking her watch. Remember, we only get one shot at this. Make it count. The abandoned grain elevator loomed against the darkening sky, its weathered silhouette a stark reminder of more prosperous times. Reese stood in its shadow, her heart thundering beneath the hidden microphone taped carefully under her collar. The puppy carrier sat beside her feet, its precious cargo unusually quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. A gentle breeze stirred loose gravel in the empty parking lot, carrying with it the musty scent of old grain and rusty metal. Reese checked her watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. She knew Deputy Beach and her team were positioned strategically around the perimeter, but standing alone made her feel terrifyingly exposed. Inside the carrier, Lumen pressed his tiny nose against the mesh, his dark eyes fixed on Reese with unwavering trust. She knelt down, slipping her fingers through the gaps to scratch behind his ears. We're going to make this right, she whispered, as much to herself as to the pups. The crunch of tires on gravel announced Caro's arrival. His black SUV rolled to a stop with precision, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Reese straightened, squaring her shoulders as Caro emerged from the vehicle. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way, dressed impeccably in a crisp, button-down shirt despite the late hour. Ms. Calder? He greeted her, his smile practiced and hollow. I appreciate you being reasonable about this situation. He approached with measured steps, maintaining a carefully calibrated distance that spoke of both authority and false courtesy. Reese forced herself to breathe normally, remembering Beech's coaching. Let him lead the conversation. Keep him talking. "I just want to make sure everything's handled properly," she replied, gesturing to the transfer papers she'd laid out on the hood of her car. Caro's smile widened fractionally as he reached for the documents. "Of course. Everything by the book." His eyes skimmed the papers with practiced efficiency, pen already in hand. "These look perfectly in order." The scratch of his pen seemed unnaturally loud in the evening quiet. Reese watched him sign with flourishing strokes, noting how his manicured hands contrasted with the rough surroundings. He was so sure of himself, so certain of his control over the situation. "You know," he said conversationally, still writing, "it's fortunate we're resolving this tonight. Dawn brings so much paperwork these days, insurance forms, inventory updates." He paused, pen hovering. "Cleaning out old stock before the new fiscal year. All very tedious." Reese's pulse quickened. There it was, exactly what they needed. She kept her voice steady, echoing his phrasing carefully. "Cleaning out old stock? That must be quite an undertaking." "Indeed." Caro's tone remained light, but his eyes gleamed with something darker. "Sometimes a fresh start is necessary. Out with the old, in with the new, preferably before sunrise. Timing is everything in business, wouldn't you agree?" "Sunrise seems like an important deadline," Reese prompted, fighting to keep her voice casual. Inside, her heart was racing. He was falling for it, dropping exactly the kind of hints they needed. Caro finished signing with a flourish, tapping the papers into a neat stack. "Yes, well, some paperwork is best processed early, especially when dealing with..." He paused, choosing his words with obvious care. "Inventory adjustments." For one breathless moment, victory seemed within reach. The wire was catching everything, his careful hints about dawn deadlines and cleaning old stock painting a clear picture of premeditation. Reese could almost feel the relief radiating from the surveillance team. Then everything changed. Caro's gaze shifted, focusing on something beyond Reese's shoulder. His expression hardened, charm vanishing like morning frost under a harsh sun. In that instant, she knew he'd spotted Beech's observation car, partially visible through the gaps between the grain elevator's support structures. Without warning, he seized the transfer papers, ripping them in half with deliberate force. The torn pieces fluttered to the ground as his other hand moved to his waist, drawing a concealed pistol with practiced ease. "Move," he commanded, all pretense of civility gone. The gun's barrel pointed steadily at Reese's midsection. "Bring the carrier." Reese's hands trembled as she reached for the puppy carrier. Lumen whimpered softly, pressing against her fingers as she lifted it. The other pups stirred, sensing the sudden tension in the air. "Toward the flood channel," Caro directed, gesturing with the gun toward the concrete drainage system that ran behind the elevator. "Nice and slow, no sudden movements." Reese clutched the carrier close, feeling Lumen's warmth against her side as she began walking. Gravel crunched under her feet, each step taking them further from the relative safety of the open lot. The flood channel gaped ahead like an open wound in the earth, its concrete walls disappearing into shadow. "You really should have just handed them over this morning," Caro said, his voice carrying an edge of cruel amusement. "Could have avoided all this unpleasantness, but you had to play detective, didn't you?" They moved steadily toward the channel's edge, Caro maintaining a careful distance behind her. Reese's mind raced, knowing the surveillance team would be repositioning, but also knowing they couldn't move too quickly without putting her at risk. The weight of the carrier seemed to grow with each step, Lumen's trust now feeling like an almost unbearable responsibility. The concrete walls of the flood channel rose around them as they descended, the last rays of sunlight barely reaching the bottom. The sound of their footsteps echoed hollowly off the smooth walls, creating an eerie chorus of their forced march. Reese could feel the hidden microphone pressing against her skin, wondering if it was still transmitting clearly in this concrete canyon. Caro's voice came from behind her, cold and precise. "You know, Miss Calder, this is becoming a pattern with you, making things needlessly complicated. First the accident scene, then the break-in that wasn't quite successful enough, and now this amateur sting operation." He clicked his tongue disapprovingly. "Some people just can't leave well enough alone." Reese tightened her grip on the carrier, feeling Lumen press against her hand through the mesh. She thought of Kiva, dying in her arms, trusting her to protect these precious lives. The memory strengthened her resolve, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't let that trust be in vain. The flood channel stretched ahead into darkness, its concrete walls now fully shadowed in the failing light. Each echo of their footsteps seemed to mock the confidence they'd felt earlier, when the sting operation had seemed so foolproof. Now, with Caro's gun trained on her back and the pups' lives in the balance, that confidence felt like a distant memory. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Reese with each step, not just for the pups, but for Kiva's memory, for the truth they'd uncovered, and for everyone who had risked helping her get to this point. Somewhere above, she knew Beach and her team were scrambling to adapt, but down here in the concrete channel, she felt terrifyingly alone with a man who had already proven he was capable of murder. Through the deepening shadows of the flood channel, Caro gestured with his gun toward a narrow footbridge spanning the concrete chasm. The wooden structure looked ancient, weathered planks sagging between rusted support beams. Reese's heart hammered as she took in the rotting wood and corroded metal. This wasn't just a crossing, it was a death trap. "Move," Caro commanded, prodding her forward with the barrel of his weapon. Nice and slow across the bridge. Reese clutched the carrier tighter, feeling the pups shift nervously inside. Lumen pressed against the mesh, his small body trembling but his eyes alert and focused. The first step onto the bridge produced an ominous creak that echoed off the channel walls. "Keep going," Caro growled from behind her, "and don't try anything stupid." Each step felt like an eternity as the old wood groaned beneath her feet. Splinters jutted from the weathered planks, and gaps between the boards revealed the dry concrete channel far below. Reese tried to distribute her weight evenly, but the carrier threw off her balance, forcing her to move with agonizing slowness. Halfway across, a sharp crack split the air. The plank beneath Reese's right foot suddenly gave way, splintering into rotted fragments. She lurched forward, desperately trying to maintain her footing, but the sudden movement caused more boards to crumble. In a heart-stopping moment, the section of bridge beneath her collapsed entirely. Reese dropped through the gap, her stomach lurching as gravity took hold. By pure instinct, she managed to hook her left arm over one of the support beams, the carrier snagging on the remaining planks beside her. Pain shot through her shoulder as her full weight yanked against the beam. The pups yelped in terror, their frightened cries echoing off the concrete walls. "Help!" The word tore from her throat before she could stop it. Below her dangling feet, the channel floor gaped like a hungry mouth, the fall easily enough to kill or cripple. Caro's laughter drifted down from above. "Now this is interesting," he said, his voice thick with cruel amusement. "Quite the predicament you've gotten yourself into, Ms. Calder." Reese's arm burned, muscles straining to maintain her grip on the beam. The rough wood scraped against her skin, splinters driving deep as she tried to pull herself up. Each attempt to gain purchase only seemed to make things worse, her forearm becoming increasingly raw and bloodied against the weathered surface. The carrier swayed precariously, caught on the remaining planks, but threatening to slip at any moment. Through the mesh, Reese could see Lumen watching intently. Then, to her amazement, the small pup began to move with purpose. He squeezed through the carrier's door and wedged himself between two of the remaining slats, his little body pressing against the carrier's side to help brace it. "Clever pup," Caro observed from the bank, "just like his mother." Too bad she had to go. But then that's what happens when assets outlive their usefulness. Reese gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus on survival rather than rage. With Lumen helping stabilize the carrier, she could concentrate on pulling herself up. Every movement was agony, her scraped forearm leaving smears of blood on the beam, but inch by inch she began to make progress. "You know," Caro continued conversationally, "this actually works out rather well. A tragic accident on an unsafe bridge, so much cleaner than what I had planned for later. The evidence goes down with you, and those troublesome pups won't be around to complicate things." Finally managing to get her upper body onto the remaining planks, Rhys lay gasping for breath. Lumen remained steadfast in his position, keeping the carrier from tipping as she recovered her strength. The small pup's eyes never left Caro, tracking his every movement with an intensity that seemed beyond his young age. Caro stepped onto the far end of the bridge, testing its stability with deliberate steps. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a book of matches, holding them up so Rhys could see clearly in the fading light. "You know what the real irony is?" he asked, flicking one match against the striker. "I was going to wait until dawn, do things properly. But sometimes opportunities just present themselves." The match flared to life, casting dancing shadows across his face. "A little accelerant in the right places, and this whole structure goes up. The investigation will blame rot and neglect. Such a shame about the young paramedic and those poor puppies." But as Caro leaned forward, savoring his moment of triumph, Lumen exploded into action. The pup launched himself through the gap in the planks, teeth finding purchase in Caro's sleeve. The sudden attack caused Caro to stumble backward, the matchbook tumbling from his grasp. Rhys lunged forward, snatching the fallen matchbook before it could fall through the bridge. In the dim light, she could make out a stamp on its surface, a delivery code from a fuel supplier, the same one mentioned in the recorder's evidence about the planned burn. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the evening air, growing steadily louder. Caro's face contorted with fury as he shook Lumen free, the pup scrambling back to safety near Rhys. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, all pretense of sophistication gone. "But it doesn't matter, the fire's still happening. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever it takes, those contracts are worth more than all your lives combined." "Drop the weapon, Caro!" Deputy Beecher's voice rang out from the channel bank, accompanied by the sound of multiple firearms being readied. She and Dwight had managed to work their way into position, their weapons trained steadily on Caro. "It's over," Dwight added, his usually gentle voice hard with determination. "We heard everything. The confession about Kiva, the planned fire, all of it." Caro's eyes darted between his opponents, calculating odds even now. Rhys could see the moment he realized he was truly trapped, his features twisting into a mask of thwarted rage. But he made no move to lower his weapon, creating a tense standoff as Beech and Dwight began carefully advancing along the channel banks. Lumen pressed against Rhys's leg, his small body still trembling, but his stance protective. In that moment, she saw Kiva's spirit living on in her smallest pup. The same bravery, the same instinct to protect, the same unwavering loyalty that had marked his mother's final acts. The sirens grew closer, backup units converging on their location. Beech and Dwight maintained their positions, weapons unwavering as they edged closer to making the arrest. The matchbook in Rhys's hand felt like a burning coal, the final piece of evidence linking Caro to his planned arson, complete with the supplier's delivery code that would trace back to his purchase of accelerants. The tension crackled in the desert air as Deputy Marla Beech moved with practiced precision, her boots crunching on loose gravel as she approached Caro. Her service weapon remained steadily trained on him, while Dwight covered from the opposite angle. The matchbook that Lumen had knocked free lay scattered on the wooden planks, its pages fluttering in the morning breeze, damning evidence of Caro's planned arson. "On your knees, hands behind your head," Beech commanded, her voice carrying the full weight of authority. Gone was any trace of her former hesitation or divided loyalties. Caro's facade of control finally cracked. His face twisted with rage as he slowly lowered himself to his knees, the wooden bridge creaking beneath him. Beech moved in smoothly, holstering her weapon and pulling out her handcuffs in one fluid motion. The steel bracelets clicked shut around his wrists with a satisfying finality. "Eldon Caro, you're under arrest," Beech announced clearly, her voice carrying across the flood channel. She began reading him his rights as the wail of approaching sirens grew louder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Reese watched from her position on the bridge, still catching her breath from the near fall, her forearm raw and bleeding from where she'd pulled herself up. Lumen pressed against her leg, his small body trembling but his stance protective. The other puppies whined softly from their carrier, sensing the shift in energy around them. Backup units arrived in a cloud of dust, their red and blue lights painting the morning scene in alternating colors. Deputy Beach grabbed her radio, her voice crisp and professional. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Beach. I need CSI at my location. Suspect in custody. Multiple charges: attempted arson, animal cruelty, attempted murder of a civilian witness." She paused, then added firmly, "And get someone from the DA's office out here. This one's going to stick." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Crime scene technicians photographed everything: the scattered matchbook, the blue paint transfers on the bridge posts where Caro's truck had scraped, the carrier that had nearly fallen into the channel. They collected the recording device from Reese's wire, carefully bagging and tagging each piece of evidence. By mid-morning, word came down that the county commissioners had called an emergency session. Within hours, they voted unanimously to void Caro's security dog contracts. County investigators descended on his kennel facility, armed with warrants to seize all records and documentation. Dwight stood beside Reese as they watched the proceedings, his normally stoic expression softened with relief. "You know," he said, scratching behind Lumen's ears, "I heard through the grapevine that the county's going to need new certified handlers for their K9 program. Someone who actually knows how to treat working dogs right." Reese smiled, feeling the weight of the past weeks finally starting to lift. "One step at a time," she said. "First, there's something I need to do." The adoption paperwork was surprisingly straightforward. The county animal control officer, a kind-faced woman named Gloria, helped Reese navigate the forms. "It's not often we get to do something this satisfying," Gloria said, as she stamped the final approval. "Lumen's officially yours now." The other 5 puppies from Kiva's litter found homes with experienced K9 handlers who understood their special heritage. Each new owner signed agreements acknowledging the pup's lineage and promising to honor Kiva's training methods. Reese made sure they all had her contact information, wanting to keep track of the entire family. A week after Caro's arrest, Reese drove out to the spot where Kiva had died, protecting her pups. The desert morning was cool and clear, with purple shadow still clinging to the distant mountains. Lumen sat in the passenger seat, his head held high, nose twitching at the familiar scents. They walked together to the culvert where it had all begun. Spring wildflowers had pushed through the sandy soil: yellow desert marigolds, purple verbena, and delicate white primrose. Reese knelt and carefully laid Kiva's old bandana among the blooms, smoothing the faded fabric with gentle fingers. "Your mum was something special," she told Lumen softly. The young dog's ears perked forward, listening intently. She knew exactly what she was doing when she chose us to find her that night. Standing up, Reese pulled a small training target from her pocket, a simple wooden panel she'd been using to work with Lumen. She positioned it against the culvert wall, then stepped back. "Okay, buddy, show me what you've got." Lumen's entire body focused with sudden intensity. He approached the target, sniffed carefully, then raised his paw and scratched 3 times, exactly as his mother had done that night at Reese's trailer, the alert that had saved their lives. "Perfect," Reese praised, her heart swelling with pride. She rewarded him with his favorite treat and an enthusiastic ear scratch. They practiced several more times, turning it into their special ritual, a way to honor Kiva's legacy while strengthening their own bond. Later that afternoon, Reese met Dwight and Beach at the local diner for coffee. The familiar smell of brewing coffee and fresh-baked pie filled the air as they settled into their usual booth. "Well, well," Dwight said with a grin, sliding a newspaper across the table. "Looks like someone's making quite a name for herself in the department." The headline announced upcoming changes to the county's K-9 program, with quotes from several officials praising the recent exposure of corruption. They're talking about creating a whole new oversight committee. Beach added, stirring sugar into her coffee. And guess who they want as a civilian consultant? She looked meaningfully at Reese. I don't know about all that. Reese demurred, but she couldn't help smiling. It felt good to be taken seriously, to have her instincts validated so thoroughly. Beach reached across the table and grabbed Reese's hand, surprising them both with the gesture. Listen, she said, meeting Reese's eyes directly. I need to say this. You were right, about everything. And I was wrong to ignore what was happening for so long. Thank you for not giving up, for making me see what I needed to see. The simple honesty in Beach's voice, free from her usual defensive distance, touched Reese deeply. We all did what we had to do, she replied quietly. What matters is that justice finally happened. They lingered over their coffee, trading stories and plans for the future. Dwight couldn't resist teasing about possible promotions, but his pride in Reese's accomplishments was obvious. Lumen dozed contentedly under the table, occasionally accepting bits of bacon from the waitress who had quickly become his devoted fan. As the afternoon light began to fade, Reese stood to leave. She had a night shift ahead, but for once the prospect didn't weigh on her. Something fundamental had shifted inside her over these past weeks. The second-guessing that had plagued her early career decisions, the constant worry about measuring up to others' expectations, all of that seemed to have melted away, replaced by a quiet certainty in her own judgment. She walked out into the parking lot with Lumen at her heel, his steps perfectly matched to hers. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and creosote. It felt like a new beginning, one earned through trial and persistence rather than simply granted. Reese paused to scratch Lumen's ears, smiling as he leaned into her touch. Ready to go to work, partner? His tail wagged once, decisive and sure. Together they walked toward her truck, moving forward into whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing they would face them with the same determination that had brought them to this moment. The past was honored, its lessons learned and integrated. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility, and they were ready to meet it head-on. Behind them, the sun sank lower, casting their joined shadows long across the pavement. One tall figure and one four-legged companion, moving in perfect sync toward tomorrow's promises. The desert wind carried away the last echoes of their footsteps, leaving only peace in its wake. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.